Okay, so I want to go back over the encounter between Nathan the prophet and David HaMelech, which we learned last week. They're very interesting, important aspects to this. So we said that the Almighty sent Nathan the prophet to come to David, and he started off telling him a story, an account of apparently something that happened that he wanted to bring to David's attention. Now this was probably around 6 months after the incident with Bathsheba and the subsequent incident with Uriah. We have to understand, and we shall have to consider this at length as we continue, David's state of mind. We will learn in the Gemara that the Almighty tested David, and David seemingly failed the test. In other words, we shall see that the Almighty said to David, I'm going to give you a test in a matter of improper sexual relations. Now we know that David had relations with Bathsheba, and when he heard that she was pregnant, she sent back a message to him that she was pregnant. He was now in a quandary. What's he going to do? At this point, it would appear that Bathsheba was married to Uriah, in which case the situation is very bad indeed, because if he lived with her when she was married, that's adultery, is liable to death. And even if there were no witnesses, the question would be whether they're witnesses, not witnesses to the actual act, but witnesses of his servants that brought her to him and presumably saw them go into a closed room together. That might be sufficient evidence. On the other hand, as we shall see, there will be a technical defense to the charge of adultery. And I'll explain now, because it's very important that we know the nature of this technical defense. The law was, at the time that David was king, that any one of his soldiers who went out to fight in the wars, before he went to fight, he was required to give his wife a divorce, a get. The reason for this is clear. If a man were to be lost in battle, but his body was not found, either because he was killed and the bodies were not collected, perhaps the enemy captured the body, or he was captured, or possibly captured, then the wife is in a very difficult situation. The law is that she cannot remarry until there is clear proof that the husband was dead. That means that the body has to be accounted for, or at least witnesses, or perhaps one witness has to recognize the dead body. But this may not be possible. And therefore we would be in the unenviable situation that the wives of a soldier who got killed or got missing in the battle, she would be stuck. It's called an aguna, a tied woman. She wouldn't be able to marry again. So to avoid this possibility, the husband would give the wife a divorce before he went out to battle. Now this divorce we shall have to consider some detail at another time, the legal nature of that divorce. Whether it will see that there are two views about it. One is that it is a conditional divorce. That means he says, if I don't come back from the war, this is your divorce and you're a divorced woman. If I come back from the war, it's not a divorce at all. Or the other view was that it was actually a divorce in all circumstances.
What was that? We also...
The first view was a conditional. The second view was that it was a divorce.
Okay.
And they were legally divorced. But if he came back from the war, so then either the divorce would be cancelled or it would be considered that they were married again. But this divorce was only a legal, I won't say a fiction, a legal document to avoid the problem that the husband may be missing and couldn't be identified, and that the wife would be bound to him. It was not intended that there would be a divorce in any kind of social or real sense between the husband and the wife. God forbid, they were happily married, there may have been children, the husband is going out to war to do a righteous battle, and he wouldn't want to divorce his wife. So it was understood that this was merely a legal maneuver to avoid the dire result if the husband was missing in war. According to this then, Bathsheba was divorced from Uriah at the time that David had relations with her, because Uriah was out at war and there was a divorce. Maybe the divorce was conditional upon him not coming back from war. We'll have to consider that. But even though there was a legal divorce, in practice, in normal circumstances, of course she wasn't separated from him. They were still, in a sense, husband and wife, and she's referred to all throughout the chapters as the wife of Uriah. And God forbid that under the pretext of this divorce, someone else would come and have relations with her and live with her and say, well, she's a divorced woman. The husband comes back from war, there's another man in the house. It would be awful. It would be unthinkable. So that when David, for the reasons which we shall, or the lack of reasons which we shall have to consider, has relations with Bathsheba, even though technically it may not be adultery because technically there is a legal divorce, but in moral terms and in real terms, it's an awful thing to do, because she is in a sense married. It's her husband who's gone off to do battle. So David knows this. So now when he hears that she's pregnant, for him to acknowledge that he's the father would be an awful thing. He's a king. How can he take advantage of the fact that one of his captains, I think Uriah was probably one of his captains, one of his officers, how can he take advantage of the fact that one of his officers has gone off to war to run in and have relations with the wife? For an ordinary man that would be bad enough. For a king to usurp his power and his authority as a king, that would be awful. Even though we know that kings, as I said before, at that time, and perhaps presidents at this time, do awful things, but David, as we shall learn, was not of that ilk. So now he learns that she's pregnant. So what's he going to do? He can't acknowledge that he's the father. So he's in a quandary. So he said that the first thing he thought he would do would be to bring Uriah back home and send it back to Jerusalem and send him back to his house, so that when Bathsheba eventually has a baby, it would be thought that it may well be that it was Uriah's baby. How much time between the intercourse that they had and this, we don't know, but it might very well have been within a 2-month period. And we know, particularly at the time of the Tanakh, that babies were born either a full term, which is 9 months, or a short term, which is 7 months. Interestingly enough, a baby who's born in 8 months cannot live. Nowadays, of course, it can live in an incubator, etc. But at that time, an 8-month baby was considered not capable of living. But there was a 9-month baby, which was a full-term baby, and a 7th-month baby, which was a premature baby who could nevertheless live. So perhaps she thought maybe this was just 2 months later, so therefore if she gave birth, people might think it was a 7-month baby. We'll go into this again with more detail, but that's his state of mind. Well, what can I do? Maybe I better try this. But we know that Uriah wouldn't play the game. He didn't want to go home. The second night, David got him drunk. He still didn't want to go home. He slept outside with the soldiers. I'm a man of war, I'm a soldier, I can't go home. We shall have to examine the implications of that rather more deeply. But that's the story. So now David is in an even more difficult position. That didn't work, right? So now again, for him to acknowledge that he's the father is very difficult. Uriah won't go back to his wife. So now David decides that Uriah has to die. And again, in strict legal terms, as we shall see, Uriah is indeed liable to the death penalty. He's liable to the death penalty because he didn't obey the king. And at that time, the power of the king was such that if someone didn't obey the king, or went against the king, or as we'll see, referred to the king in an improper way, that could be construed as what's called mered, rebellion. And the punishment for rebellion against the king is death. And furthermore, it is not necessarily an offense which has to be tried by the court. Normally, a capital offense has to be tried by a court of 23 judges. But the king is an exception to this rule. If someone rebels against the king has the right to put that person to death. So Uriah was liable for the death penalty for 2 reasons. One is when he came back and David asked him what the state of the war was, and he reported. He reported to David in the following language. He said to David, "My lord," he said, "the ark," when Uriah said to David, David said, "You better go home to your wife. Why didn't you go home last night?" Uriah said to David, "The ark," which was the holy ark, they took the ark into battle. And Israel and Yehuda, both the northern kingdom and the southern people from the tribe of Yehuda, are united now, are staying outside in the camp. And my lord Joab, Joab, remember, is the general. We shall meet Joab many times. He was David's nephew. What? He was David's nephew. And he was the general. He was in charge of the army. The Malvin says all this happened because David should have gone out with the army. The king usually goes out with the army. Instead of that, he stayed at home. So Yoav was in charge of the army, he was the general, and Uriah said to David, my lord, my master, my lord, Adoni is my master, Yoav, and the servants of my master are camping in the field. Now you can't call someone else my master in front of the king. The king is his master. And to call Yoav his master is tantamount to rebellion against the king. It downplaces the king. That's number one. And number two, David twice told him to go home to his wife, and he didn't, he refused. So both of those acts are rebellion against the king. Now I might think, well, they're not such terrible rebellion. I mean, there's much worse rebellion. We'll see what Absalom does. One is he called Yoav my master. He shouldn't do that. But Yoav was the general, he was the head of the army. And he didn't go home to the wife because he felt it was better to stay out with the other soldiers. So there might be mitigating circumstances. But nevertheless, in the strict line of law, maybe David had the right to kill him. But it's not very nice. It's not very nice. It's not a coincidence that Uri was the husband of Bathsheba whom he got pregnant. And then he sent a message to Yoav, which said before, put him in the front line and leave him on his own, so make sure he gets killed in a battle. None of that is very nice, to say the least. And David knows that. David is not a Saddam Hussein who does what he likes and rules with an iron hand. He was, as we shall see more and more, a righteous man, a great righteous man. He's the psalmist, the composer of the Psalms, the servant of God, way, way back from the time of Goliath and onwards. So David, I suppose he found himself in a way that he couldn't get out of, you know. First of all, now he shouldn't have been with her, but he is with her. Oh, now she's pregnant. What am I going to do? Well, I'll try and cover it up. That doesn't work. Or what am I going to do? And I have to get rid of Uriah. He must have felt that he had no choice. So he felt very bad. And we shall see, we shall pursue this further. But in the meantime, Uriah is dead. Bathsheba is about to give birth. And Nathan the prophet comes to see him. So Nathan the prophet, we know, tells him this story about a rich man and a poor man. And the poor man has a little sheep, very heart-rending story. The rich man has cattle and sheep, as much as he wants. A visitor comes, a traveler, a passerby to the rich man. Now he stays in the rich man's house. It becomes closer to him. The rich man wants to make a feast for his guest.
Make a
Feast, a suda, a feast for his guest. Well, he's got plenty of sheep, he's got plenty of cattle, but no. He goes and takes this poor little lamb from the poor man. The poor man had brought the little lamb up like one of his household, right? He slept in the same bed, ate off his food. So he takes the lamb from the poor man and he chefs it, he slaughters it, and he serves it to the guest as food. Damn it. What an awful thing David says. David says, and I want to go back because this is very, very critical. David says, he was very angry. And he says, as Hashem lives, he takes an oath. He's a dead man. Ki ben movet ha'isha osezot. He's like a dead man. He deserves to die. And it's not as if it's an ordinary person who says he deserves to die. When the king says he deserves to die, he deserves to die. Not that legally he's liable to death penalty, the rich man, because he didn't kill anyone, he took a sheep. And the law is if you take a sheep, you have to pay back. We said, and if he shechs it, he has to pay back 4 times. And David added that, and he said the sheep, he shall have to pay 4 times for it, because he did this terrible thing, and he had no compassion. Natan said to David, "You're the man. Thus says Hashem, the God of Israel." And he said before, he's anointed him to be the king, he's given him what he wants, whatever he wants he'll give him more and more. And how could he do such a terrible thing? Why did you scorn the word of Hashem, he says, and you struck Uriah the Hittite with a sword? His wife you had taken yourself for a wife, and you have killed him by the sword of the children of Ammon. So now in this judgment, this terrible judgment of Natan, does it say, well, she wasn't really his wife, they were divorced. And nowhere does he say, well, you could have killed Uriah because he was revolting against the kingdom. On the face of it, it's very clear, right? You took his wife and you had him killed. Not a word of defense there. And the judgment, he says, the sword will not cease from your house forever, because you have scorned me and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be a wife unto you. Very clear, strong. And now, the Almighty says, I shall raise evil against you, and he says, I shall take your wives in your eyes, and I will give them to, Eicha means like your friend or your neighbor or so your companion, someone close to you. And he will lay with your wives in full view of the sun. Now we'll come to that part of the judgment later on, what that meant and how that was accomplished. But in the meantime, there's a very heavy judgment. However, he doesn't say that you're liable to the death penalty. He says the sword will not leave your house, and as for the wives, some a man, a close man to you, will lay with your wives in front of your eyes. Because that which you did in secret, I shall do to you in front of all Israel, and again in front of the sun. So what does David say? David says to Natan, Chatati la Hashem, I have sinned to the Almighty. Now, this is going to be difficult for the Gemara, which we said that anyone who says David sinned is mistaken. Here David himself said, I have sinned. So that's going to be a problem. And what's more, now there were two texts that I want to refer to regarding this encounter between Natan and David. The first one, we are fortunate in understanding, trying to understand the whole story of David, is that we have the Psalms. David wrote Psalms, and some of the Psalms are specifically related to these incidents. Psalm 51, L'Manatzach Mizmor David. L'Manatzach is the conductor, so many of the Psalms are written for the conductor, whatever that means. It means that it was psalm which was in the nature of a song. Some of the psalms are like songs, mizmor, and some of them are written to uplift the composer, David. And he's writing this psalm to uplift himself. Because what does he say? This psalm says, a psalm which is for the conductor, a mizmor David. There are psalms which are called mizmor David, which is a song for David, and psalms which are called the David mizmor. Mizmor David usually means that he starts off in a space of depression or anxiety, or not in a high place, and the psalm lifts him up. Whereas the David mizmor is already in a high exalted state. So he says, when Natan the Navi came to him, after David had had relations with Bathsheba. So this Psalm 51 is expressly written about this occasion. And although it's a longish psalm, and in the book of Shmuel, David just says, I sinned. So here it goes into detail. Even though I assume that it was composed, perhaps subsequently wrote it down, nevertheless it expresses what's going on with David at that time. And he says straight away, Almighty, grant me your compassion, for in your great love may you wipe away my sin. And then the next 7 or 8 verses all talk about his sin. So it's very clear from this psalm that David acknowledges his sin. And we shall see that this represents for David what's called tshuva. Tshuva, I don't like to translate it as repentance, I like to translate it as return, but repentance is one aspect of it, tshuva. So therefore, immediately that he understands the story, that it isn't really a story of something that happened. It's a mashal, it's a parable. Why a parable? A parable is much stronger. If someone tells another person, you've done wrong, you did this, so often the reaction will be to justify himself, one thing or another. But when he tells it as a parable, and then David relates to it as a fact, and from an objective point of view, he sees that this man has done wrong and deserves punishment, and then to be told and realize that that's yourself, that's a very powerful. Interestingly enough, in the story, nothing is said about the rich man killing the poor man. He took his sheep, which is the equivalent of the offense regarding Bathsheba. But Natan adds after that he killed Uriah. So really both things are there at that time. The other account, which I want to talk about today, is very interesting, Zohar. And the Zohar, we know, is the commentary on the Tanakh, which was taught by Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai to his students after he ran from the Romans. It was written down sometime later. It's a very difficult Tus, the Sefer book, which is the basis really of most systems of Kabbalah. In the introduction to the Zohar is divided up into commentaries on the weekly Parsha, but there's a long introduction. And I want to go today into this introduction. Rav Hamnuna the elder said, he said there's a verse in Kohelet, written incidentally of course by David's son Shlomo, you mustn't allow your mouth to cause your flesh to do sin. Don't allow your mouth to bring your physical body to do sin. And a man shouldn't allow his mouth to bring him to have thoughts, bad thoughts. Man shouldn't say things. We're very concerned about bad thoughts. The Zohar particularly is very concerned with preserving the holy relationship between man and wife, and very strong against any illicit sexual relations. Because he says, maybe man will say things and he'll come to commit some offense against the sacred nature of the sexual aspect of relationship. It should be between a man and his wife. Because if he does such a thing, he's going to go to hell. He's going to go to Gehenna. We have in Jewish law a place called Gehenna, which we could try. I don't want to go into all the aspects of what it is, but we could loosely translate it as a place of hell. And there is an angel or a minister appointed on Gehenna, whose name is Duma. Duma, which also means sleep. The Zohar always tells us that there are ministers appointed by the higher authority on various phenomena, sea, etc. And this man Duma is the one who is appointed on Gehenna. And he's not on his own. He has many tens of thousands of angels of destruction with him. If it's necessary to bring people down to Gehenna, he has plenty of servants who will do his work. And they are all standing at the gate of Gehenna. Now, anyone who preserves his Brit Milah and his holy covenant and does not fall into sexual transgression, see, he doesn't go into Gehenna. The angels are there, two things. One is to bring people who deserve it there, and the other is to safeguard people who don't deserve it to go down. And now he comes to our story. David HaMelech, at the time that this whole story happened, he was afraid. In other words, now, at the time that Natan tells him what the Almighty says, even before perhaps, David was afraid. And Duma, the officer in charge of Gehenna, comes before the Kodesh Baruch Hu. He goes up to the heavenly court and he says to him, Master of the universe, it's written in your Torah that a man who commits adultery with a married woman liable to the death penalty. David, he was profaned his holy writ with this illegal act. What's the law? In other words, I want to take him with me back to Gehenna. So the Kodesh Baruch Hu says to him, no, David is innocent. And his holy covenant he hasn't touched. Why? Because it was revealed before me that Bathsheba was set aside for him from the time the world was created. In other words, the Almighty says, when I create the world, although of course man has free will, but certain things are predetermined. What the relationship between predetermination and free will is a very deep question which we may have to consider further. But at this time, the Kodesh Baruch Hu says to Dumya, well, David and Bathsheba were supposed to be together. That was set up from the beginning of the creation of the world. That was revealed before me. So Dumya says to him, well, it may have been revealed to you, Master, but it wasn't revealed to David. David didn't know about this. Maybe he did have some idea, but at that point in the complaint that Dumya is bringing before the Kodesh Baruch Hu, he says, well, you may have known that, but David certainly didn't know that. And the Kodesh Baruch Hu said, well, anyway, he didn't answer that question, but he said it was permissible. He lived with her not in an illegal way, but it was permitted. Why? Because as I said to you, anyone who goes out to war, before he goes out to war, he has to give his wife a divorce. So Uri had given his wife divorce, so we won't go into the rights and wrongs and the morals of it. But in the strict law, he didn't commit adultery, so you can't take him off together. So Dumya says, well, but there's another rule, you have to wait 3 months. If a man dies, the rule is that no one else is allowed to marry his widow for 3 months. Why? Because of the reason that I told you before. She might be pregnant from the first husband. And if she marries the second husband before 3 months, so if she has a baby, we don't know whether the baby came from the first husband, which was a full-term husband, or the second husband, which was a premature baby, a 7-month baby. So in order to avoid that possibility, which would be a very bad ambiguity, we don't know who the father of the child is. So therefore we have a rule that you have to wait 3 months. And says to him, he didn't wait 3 months. So the Almighty doesn't answer that question straight away. But he says this, and this is very important. Why do you think that there is any suspicion that she may have been pregnant from Uri? And that's why he had to wait 3 months. It says that he never had relations with her. The Almighty says he couldn't have been from him. He wouldn't have to wait 3 months because there was no possibility that even if she were pregnant, he could have come from him because he never had relations with her. It's a very important Zohar which we will have to consider further on. So again, Judean says, well, you may know that he never had relations with her, but David didn't know that he didn't have relations with her. That the first husband, Uriah, never had relations with her. And indeed, you see, he sent him home. He said, go home to your wife and wash your feet. And wash your feet is a nice way of saying, have relations with her. So David didn't know that. So now the Kodesh Baruch Hu answers another way. He says, well, anyway, it was more than 3 months. It was 4 months. And he gives all kinds of proofs that it was 4. So this is a very interesting Zohar. And already we see that the Zohar brings the defense that the Gemara will also bring in connection with the divorce. And the Zohar is coming to protect David from the death penalty. Because if he had truly committed adultery, he would be liable to the death penalty. This Zohar doesn't talk about the death of Uriah. Another Zohar, which we'll bring another time, talks about the death of Uriah. So according to this Zohar, when the Almighty sends Natan to tell David this whole story and to confront him with what David certainly says is my sin, it was already fixed in the heavens that he would not be liable to the death penalty. There is a view which says that really he was liable to the death penalty. But as we shall see, the little boy who was conceived as a result of this, he died. And so in a sense he took the punishment of the death penalty from David to the little boy. However, even though he wasn't liable to the death penalty, it was a very, very serious story. The two aspects, the Bathsheba aspect and the Uriah aspect. And we see that the judgment of the Almighty through Natan was that the sword wouldn't cease from David's house during his lifetime, and perhaps onward throughout the history of the kings. So we've studied the history of the kings, and it didn't go smoothly at all. And furthermore, the judgment was that he would have to pay 4 times. What are the 4 times? The 4 times, the first one is the little boy who's going to die. The second one is Tamar, who we talked about last week, we talk about again, who was raped by Absalom and spent the rest of her life...
Not Absalom.
What?
Not Absalom.
I mean by Amnon, thank you very much. So, she was raped by Amnon, thank you, and she spent presumably the rest of her life in seclusion and in shame. Then number 3 was Amnon, who was going to be killed by Absalom. And number 4 is Absalom himself, is also going to be killed. So there were 4, even if Tamar wasn't exactly killed, she was raped and she was in seclusion as if she was dead. There were going to be 4 tragedies in David's lifetime. And even after he died, there was another brother, Adonyahu, who was also involved in the revolt. And we shall see in great detail how David was affected for the rest of his life and for the rest of his reign by what had happened. So it was a dark cloud that fell upon him. And therefore, when we said at the beginning that the trial, which I like to call the trial of King David, we said it happened in 3 courts. It happened in the lower court, which we learned, and we'll learn again, the tribunal which was judging him. It happened in the higher court, which we see from the judgment that the Almighty gives through Natan. And it will also be a case where he's judged in the court of public opinion. So that already the darkness is coming in. A tragedy, because David represents light and all the promise of the kingdom and the fulfillment of the divine promise. And when we come out of Egypt, that we will come to Israel and build the temple. And already a very heavy shadow has fallen upon it. So please God will continue next week.
Thank you.